Hey, what's going on, guys? I got a special guest here today. We have Frank Fumie. He's a pioneer in the franchise industry and the founder of I9 Sports, which is the nation's leading franchisor of youth leagues and camps. He's also got a new podcast calling Emerging Franchise Brands. Frank, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jordan. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
I'm great. I'm great. I'm excited to have you on the Clockedin podcast. Frank, where does your journey with I9 Sports start? Where did this all begin for you?
Well, it actually began where I ran an adult men's softball league in Long Island, New York. And I did that out of frustration with because the leagues that were out there were so poorly organized. And me and my college buddies were playing ball back in the 90s. And I thought, well, hell, I think I could do a better job than how the leagues that are out there, how they're doing it. And I was in medical sales full time. That was my career in the early 90s. And anyway, I started the men's softball league. It took off. Moved to the Tampa Bay area with my wife in 96, started a kids flag football league in 98, and realized we're onto something big here. We had leagues in New York and Florida. And how am I going to expand this thing? How are we going to grow? So franchising became sort of the way for that. And so I founded I9 Sports in 2003, and here we are.
Wow. And so just give a little background. Like you just started this out of the utility of wanting to run a proper league correctly.
That
Like,
is
because
it.
most
There was really no big master plan at first. I was starting an adult men's softball league because just the leagues were run so bad. And I realized, knowing how much me and my college buddies were paying to play softball, I started doing the math. I knew how many teams were in the leagues. And I'm like, these guys are making way too much money for such poor service. And I started running my men's softball league, scratched and clawed. The fields were all taken, quote unquote, not available, no umpires. And I scratched and clawed, found my way, got 52 teams the very first year. And within 4 years, by the end of the fourth year, we were the largest adult men's softball league in the state of New York. We had 1,000 softball teams. And
wow.
I chipped away. Nothing came easy, but I knew how to run sports leagues just because, I just started doing it. And I was also the
Yeah.
kid, I was also the 10-year-old kid, by the way, who turned my backyard into a wiffle ball field and kept statistics and had it created a league in my yard. So it is safe to say that I did start my quote unquote 10,000 hours way back in the late 70s when I had my wiffle ball field in Smithtown, New York.
I love that. I love that. And it's so important to realize this because there's so many of us that are living a life where it's like, I don't think this is what I want to do. I don't know what I want to do. And people will jump on something for 6 months and then just be like, no, that's not for me. But for you to go there and really leave that space available to go, hey, and I doubt at that time it was, hey, is this a side hustle? They weren't even talking about that at the time. It's just, hey, I wanted something better. And you probably started to make a little bit of money from it too, right?
Yeah, I didn't know how big was big in 1995. We made a couple $1,000. It actually paid for our wedding, and that was
That's
we were.
been.
And then we started making more money, and then before you know it, I realized, damn, I need to start hiring people. This has gotten bigger than me, and it really wasn't until we moved to Florida and several years in. It wasn't until 2001, so I was in my sixth year before I hired somebody. But I was in pharmaceutical sales then at the time in here in the Tampa Bay area, full time. I had my adult men's softball league in New York, beyond full time. I had a kids flag football league in the Tampa Bay area, and my wife and I just had our first baby. We had built a house, like everything you could possibly throw at me. I had done, and I knew that I needed to get out of the medical sales career because I just had no passion for it. I loved running my sports programs. And I think the old saying is true that some of us would rather work 80 hours a week for ourselves than work for somebody else for 40 hours. I would have worked 120 hours for myself before I'd work another hour in medical or pharmaceutical sales. Great career, but I hated it with a passion.
Yeah, no, I understand. There's many people where it's like it's not about the money; it's about what I actually enjoy. And I'm thinking about it because I was curious when you came to Tampa. How did you start the children's football league? Because isn't that usually? I would have thought I wasn't sure if you were going to have a kid at that point or you were at that point. How did you come up with that?
No, this is really wild. You know, one of the things I suggest to anybody that's an aspiring entrepreneur is be a student of your industry, right? The learning never ends. So I did just that. I always wanted to learn about the recreational sports, amateur sports business, even down to I would go to these conferences of folks that had private sports complexes. And I joined as a member, even though I didn't have a private sports complex. I just wanted to learn. I'd go to the National Intramural Sports Association meeting, athletic business conference, anything I can do. And I learned back in 1998 that the NFL was about to launch NFL flag football as a way of promoting the game of football into the local communities. I knew nothing, Jordan, about how to run a kids sports league. The only thing I knew about kids sports in 1998 was my own experience of playing as a kid back in the 70s and
Yeah,
80s. But secondly, was the stuff I saw in the media, soccer dad choking out other soccer dad on the field, or, hockey moms getting into it in the stands in New England. And like everything you saw in the media, that was my only thing that I had perception about for youth sports. But I realized that once the NFL said they're going to start going into the communities and start offering flag football, Jordan, I realized that they weren't going to teach anybody how to run a league. They were going to be nothing more than a vendor relationship. They were going to drop ship jerseys, footballs, flag belts at your door and say, here you go, and give you some rules of the game. And I knew from running my adult men's softball league, A, I knew how to run a league as a business. And B,
yeah,
I knew that the NFL was doing it all wrong. I knew that they were setting themselves up for disappointment, that they were just letting anybody run a league. And that was my lead in. And that's why I was like, I got to not only run this league, but I got to blow this thing up and expand. And that was really the birth of I9 Sports as a franchise, was because I knew there was going to be this, we were going through a flag football revolution is what was happening. Parents were tired of tackle football. They were tired of the 4 or 5 days a week of practice leading up to the big game for a recreational league. And
yeah.
that was the dawn of I9 Sports.
And I love that because there's so many entrepreneurs who want to be like, oh, I'm going to invent the next Uber or I'm going to invent the next Facebook or invent the own thing. But you partnered on the back and you didn't even partner with the NFL, but you just saw what their initiative was. And you're like, they don't know that this is a problem, but I don't even have to go to them. I will literally do this in my own community and then I will let everybody else know and they'll get an understanding of that, which I think is so powerful
You
because
know,
most businesses don't
I'm
find the
sorry.
medium. What'd you
I was
say?
very green. I was also very naive and very green. I didn't know what I didn't know. Because maybe I didn't know what I didn't know, I wasn't afraid. I didn't have any fear because I was young and dumb. I was willing to go for it. The NFL didn't even buy the domain name NFLflag.com or NFLflagfootball.com. I bought the domain in 1997. I end up letting it go, but they were not thinking like that. They were not thinking bigger picture. They were thinking like the NFL. They didn't
Yeah.
have the right mindset on who was actually going to be running these leagues. And I guess it really didn't matter at the end of the day. It accomplished their goal of getting involved in the community. And they've done it ever since. But we learned very quickly that we had to abandon running our leagues as NFL flag leagues and start running them as I9 Sports. And that was
Oh
also
wow.
a decision we made, because at first I ran I9 Sports League. I9 Sports franchisees ran their flag football leagues as the NFL
Really? And what was the big
until
difference there?
one day the NFL, this was in January of 2006, they announced that if you want to run an NFL flag league, you had to register all of your participants through a third-party software. And that was a deal breaker for me, because I knew the most valuable thing of our company was our data. And there was
Yeah.
no way I was going to let a third party own our member data, because to me that's the only thing that was the only asset our franchisees had.
Yeah.
So over a course of a weekend, I decided we were going to abandon NFL as a name. And our franchisees were really worried, because they thought maybe people are registering their kids because we're marketing as NFL flag. And Jordan, as it turned out, that very first season in 2000, spring of 2006, where we didn't market as NFL, we marketed as I9, we got double the registrations. We proved that the NFL name did absolutely nothing.
Wow, that must have been such a big decision because, especially when you're just starting out, you got your clients, you got your people who are committed, and you're like, they don't even know because even if it's the exact same people, they might think it's a different league, and it's like, are they going
Yeah.
to be run the same? It's very like franchise. That's a big decision.
It was probably the biggest strategic decision we had ever made in the company because, look, I wasn't 100% sure that we weren't getting registrations because we were marketing as NFL. But when I weighed the pros and cons, the cons of giving away our data to me was far more dangerous. And the decision ended up working out well. Not only did the decision work out well from a marketing perspective, it put I9 Sports on the roadmap that we were now a legitimate business. Moms and dads now knew what I9 Sports was. And then we got involved in merchandising, and the company took off from there. Our revenues soared once we really got involved in merchandising.
Because it's building the brand.
Yeah, we were really building a brand now. We weren't building around a framework of other people's product.
So that's funny because the NFL entry point was the entry point, which gave you the confidence. And then it's like, whoa, 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 we don't need them because they're making it too difficult. So we're actually going to remove them. And then this is going to be even better for us. Wow.
Yeah, it led us to today. We have since 2003, over 4 million kids have played in I9 Sports, and over 500,000 kids, actually over 600,000 kids play in the leagues this year in 2023 alone. Wow. None of that would have happened if we didn't make some, well, obviously we made a lot of changes and a lot of improvements over the last 20 years, but I think our story would have ended a lot differently had we not made that decision in 2006.
Absolutely. That's massive. And did you feel at that time, because you were just in it's funny because everyone always wants to place people in a box, right? And I just say, oh, you were just in medical sales. And then it's like, wait, I know the internet came out. It came out a little bit in the 80s, a little bit more in the 90s. The 2000s was really the boom. But in 97, you're sitting there going, don't touch my data. That's a conversation that happens today for
Yeah.
everyone else. Like, and it's amazing that you thought that forward today.
I think I thought that way because I ran my adult men's softball league in the 90s. And back then, you would have to give the team rosters to the counties, to the county and to the county park system and to the local municipalities. And I always had in the back of my head, like, they could literally just call the coaches of every one of my teams and say, you can play next year. It just won't be under the ABA softball league, umbrella. So I think I had it in my head from back in the 90s, like, that's the only thing I had as an asset was my customer data. And yeah, so it stemmed, I think, way back from then. Like that could have been really, really scary if we had gone the other way.
Well, I think that's so important as an entrepreneur and anyone looking to venture out on their own is as you're starting to get traction, it's, hey, what can take me out right now? Is it people deciding they quit playing softball? Well, there's a little too many people to quit softball, so they'll probably stay. So, like, what else can take me out? And you start to think through that. It's a healthy situation to think through. And it's also good for anyone who's just curious about their own life, like, where it's like, where am I too dependent on one or two variables? And that's why some people are too dependent on a job, where they're like, if I lost a job, can I support the house and the kids and the car and the everything? Like, there are these thoughts that go through your head a lot, and it's a healthy exercise.
I think
So
so. I think strategically too, I will tell you this, as an entrepreneur for almost 30 years now, I always ask myself the same question for any time I wanted to make a strategic decision. And that question was this: how would I beat myself? So if
okay,
I always thought about from the competitor standpoint, how would I beat I9 Sports when I was running I9 Sports? How would I beat the ABA softball league when I was running that in New York? When you think like that, you start thinking where the holes are, right? Where your weaknesses are. And
Yeah.
certainly going back to what we just said earlier, how would I beat I9 Sports? I'd take all their data away. I would take away all the customer data, and then I would use it against them and create their leagues under their own, with their own management team. So I always think about how you can be beaten. And when you make a decision, how does it make your competition feel? Does it give them that sick feeling in the pit of their stomach, like, oh man, I can't believe they did that? Or do they say, wow, that's great. I'm glad they did that because that was stupid. This is how my 30-year-old brain used to think when I started out.
Yeah, but it's so important because we sit there and we're like, people don't, you don't want to get stabbed in the back, or you don't want to miss something, or you don't want to be out there, but you got to be confident enough to make your own decisions. So you got to know where your holes are. And
Right.
I think that's so important. So let's fast forward. Where did the real success, where did you know that you're like, because you started in 2003, 2006, you started branding I9 Sports. What really allowed this to go like that hockey stick that they talk about?
The hockey stick started, I'd say, in 2008, when, first of all, let me just tell you that in 2005, we almost went bankrupt because we burned in the first 2 years, we burned through all of the money. And when I mean all the money, I mean I sold my Long Island softball league so I can fund I9 Sports. My wife and I bootstrapped that company. We had no investors, no partners. It was us. We sold the ABA softball league, and I put every dime into I9. We were all in. And within 2 years, it was almost all gone. We were down to about $50,000 to our name. We lost $850,000 cumulatively in those first 2 years. What turned it around was I did get some help from an outside consultant who inevitably introduced me to somebody who was near and dear to my heart, a guy by the name of Brian Sanders, who Brian and I have been dear friends now for almost 20 years. Brian's strength was my weakness. Brian is that polished business person who had been running publicly traded companies, who led hundreds of sales and marketing professionals. That wasn't my background. And what turned the company around really was him focusing on the marketing and crystallizing the experience, while I focused on the training and support, which we desperately needed for our franchisees, so we had enough critical mass so we can survive on royalties. That's when you're going to be successful as a franchisor, when you don't need to survive on selling another franchise to keep the lights on, when you're surviving on strictly royalties. And that hockey stick started around 2008, and I brought Brian on to be our president and COO in late 08. And the company really took off from there because I hired for my weakness. And that's the number one thing I would always suggest to an entrepreneur to do.
That's incredible. And the other thing I want to bring up, and not derail it, but you mentioned that you and your wife were all in on this. What was that like? Because obviously it could have been the very comfortable, I can stay in my med sales job, I can keep doing this, but you guys went and trusted each other to continue. What was that like?
I'm a big Tony Robbins guy. I've been listening to Tony since, I was one of those people that bought his cassette tapes after seeing an infomercial in 1992 at 3 a.m. because I was miserable in my medical sales job. I went to a Tony event in 1999. My daughter was a year old. I was in pharmaceutical sales. I was unhappy. And when I went to a Tony Unleash the Power Within event in Orlando, December of 99, I had this realization that it was more painful for me, for my life, to continue to do what made me so unfulfilled and so unhappy. And then, Tony does the thing, he calls it the Dickens process. And
Yes.
it's ridiculously powerful. And I've done it several times throughout my life. And when I went through the Dickens process and you project your life, how will life be like if you don't change 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now? And when Tony takes you through this process, I thought about my life. What was I teaching my daughter? What was I teaching her that 20 years from now, I'd say, well, honey, you stay safe, you do a job that you hate, I was going to be teaching my 1-year-old that it's okay to be miserable. One day when she gets older, to teach my kids that it's not okay to follow your dreams. And I was basically like, hell no, I'm going for it. And I give Tony Robbins a lot of credit. He's been a huge inspiration in my life, and he's been somehow intersected in a lot of decisions throughout my career. But that was the biggest one because it put me on a total different trajectory.
And it's just incredible because sometimes you have to remove ourselves from our current situation to see what could be a little different. Then that's why people go to conferences, they get coaches, they get all these different variables because it provides that different perspective. And that conversation with your wife, was it just, I need to do this, or this is what's happening? Like, how did that go? Because obviously that's not an easy overcoming.
No, Nadine always believed in me, and she believed. We met right before I launched my softball league in Long Island. And
Oh, really?
I told her what my dream was. And I was one of these people who didn't want to get married till I was like 30 years old because, I come from, parents that were divorced. I had all these crazy rules in my head back when I was in my 20s. And I always said, I'm never going to get married till I'm 30. When I met Nadine, we got engaged in 49 days. And
Wow.
we got married in less than a year. We got married in nine months from the time we met. So it just goes to show you, when you find the right one, when you know. And she was always 100% supportive and believed in me. And she was the one answering the phones when we started running the softball league. And she did a phenomenal job. And when it was time to franchise and go for it and quit the pharmaceutical sales job, she absolutely believed in me wholeheartedly. And I think that's another thing. Being around a lot of entrepreneurs for the last 30 years, I would tell you that having spousal or partner support or family support in believing what you're doing is incredibly powerful. Yeah, you can do the thing where it's me against the world, nobody believes in me, and screw them, I'm going to prove them wrong. Absolutely, that works too. But when you do have a few people that rally around you and help you and believe in you, even when you don't believe in yourself sometimes, man, that goes a long way. And I attribute that to my success as well.
Absolutely. And I wanted to hear that because in with Edwards Consulting, there's 5 pillars. It's mental health, physical health, community service, philanthropy, spirituality, and relationships. And I feel like some of those components are always missed. So that's why whenever I have podcast guests on, I'm like, wait, so Frank went through the most challenging time of quitting his job. Then they almost went bankrupt. And it's just like, okay, I gotta understand a little bit back to get to how did that all happen? Where does this relationship go? Like, because that's an exciting relationship that keeps it strong, that keeps it together, and it's something someone you built with. So what happened in 2008? It's growing. You have the trajectory. What happens next?
Yeah, so the company continues to grow, and I'm loving life. We're growing. We get through the recession really without a blip when it came to participants, because moms and dads, of course, continue to register their kids to play in our leagues during the recession. They're not going to tell their kids you can't play ball, right? We could not sell a franchise though to save our life though in 2009, 2010. That's okay. We built a critical mass. We had over 100 franchises. Actually,
Wow.
I sold my 100th franchise in September of '07. So before we even brought Brian on, we had already hit that 100th franchise. We hit that critical mass, which was really key for us. And that's what led me to be able to hire for my weakness and start building bench strength. But I would tell you this, Jordan, I'd say 2011 was like, man, that was like my personal peak because I feel like we were hitting on all cylinders. I was hitting on all cylinders as a CEO because I was engaged still and I was having fun. And then something happened around 2013 when I started to get a little shaken, or not shaken. I started questioning. The success of the company was going straight up. We were growing 15, 20% a year, but I was no longer needed the same way I had been in the past. I did what every entrepreneur hopes to do. I built a great team around me. They were doing all the jobs. We had all the departments. I'd go in there. I was loved by my employees. I had a great relationship with them. They loved when I was there, but I started to feel unfulfilled because I was not growing and I was not contributing because they were doing everything. And I
Yeah.
started questioning by the time I got to 2015, do I belong here anymore? And how can I possibly even enter in my brain that I may consider leaving, because this was, so at the time I thought, my purpose in life. And it was a very, very painful struggle around
That,
that
and
period.
that's so difficult because you're sitting here for years and years, like 2003, 4, 5. You're like, I wish this would happen. Then you get there, and it's not even that many years later. It's 10 years later, and you're like, this isn't what I want either.
No, the top of the mountain, what, we always see that cliche. It's not about the end, it's about the journey. It is about the journey. Those, if I think back to my happiest, most, I should say not happiest, my most fulfilling time, it was during the emerging time period, right? It wasn't
Yeah,
when after, when we're celebrating the dramatic, success and the accolades in the media. That wasn't my happiest time. It was grinding and fighting through and actually making progress, because like Tony says, progress equals happiness. And I
yes.
stopped progressing in 2015, 2016, but the company was still progressing. So we had this kind of divergence. And I had this life coach that I got through Tony, and her name is Sarah, and she helped me so much. But I've noticed that we were having these coaching calls every 2 weeks, and I wasn't getting past the same issue. Do I keep the company? Do I sell? And she asked me to do something. She asked me to write a love letter to my business. I thought it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
Letter to your company? One morning I got up early morning and I actually wrote it down on paper. I started writing a love letter. Dear I9 Sports, here's where we started. Like, I literally started writing out, here's where we were, here's how we met, here's everything we went through. Jordan, I was not expecting this. I wrote just free form. I just let it flow as just things were coming to me. The love letter turned into a breakup letter. I did not. I said at the end of the letter that I am not you, you are not me, and I think it's best that we go separate ways. I get chills just thinking about writing that
I'm
letter. I did not have that in my brain, or so I thought. I did not have that in my conscious thought when I started writing. I thought I was going to refall in love with my company, and that did not happen. It was time for it to move on. It needed to move on from me, and I needed to move on from it. And well, that's a whole other story, because I ended up selling the company because of that to my employees initially as an ESOP, which was great that everybody got rewarded.
And
And we put the
yeah,
taxes.
and just dive into the ESOP. What is that? Like, just simplify it.
So the ESOP is an employee stock ownership plan, and it allows you to sell your business to your employees without them making any investment, whereby the actual corporation, your company, goes out and secures funding. When they secure funding, let's say through a bank, the bank actually pays me, the owner of the shares, and in return, we create a separate entity, a separate company that is now owned. The shareholders of the company are the employees, and
Oh,
they
that's
all
incredible.
have shares of the business, and they can't cash them in just yet, but the company gets audited every year. The company gets valued every single year, and the company issues new shares to the employees, and they get to see the value of their shares. And I did that in 2016. And the beauty of that is, as the owner of the company, I got to still control my company. Nothing changed. I didn't sell to a competitor. My employees got rewarded. So instead of me paying Uncle Sam to sell my company, I didn't pay any capital gains tax.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I got a chance to defer all that income. So I basically got all that income and was able to invest in stocks and bonds and floating rate notes. And that appreciated. And then eventually I did sell it, and I, obviously paid taxes then, but I got a chance to defer it while all that money grew. But better than anything else, I got a chance to reward my employees, the people who helped build that company. But I did that for about 2 years. And after 2 years of having the ESOP, we decided the company was going to be worth a whole lot more. We should sell to private equity. So I sold the company, and I still retained a minority ownership from 2017 to 2021. I remained a minority owner and on the board, and in this purgatory state as an entrepreneur that was really not around at all anymore. And that's where, after that big check came and all those zeros, man, it lasted about 2 weeks. And I realized I'm not happy and I can't tell anybody because nobody's gonna have sympathy for me. And I get it. I understand why.
Wow. And just to back it up a little bit, so that ESOP, when you sold to private equity, everyone got paid out.
Everybody got paid and then they were able to cash it in. And it was
That's
life.
incredible.
My
Like
wife
you
and I
have,
cried. We cried with because we brought our employees in individually. My wife and I brought them in, and we needed that box of tissues because the payouts, I obviously won't give away the figures that everybody got, but I will tell you that many people got life-changing money, and there was only, I think, 16 to 20 people in the company. And
oh wow.
it was the most amazing experience to go through. It is probably it is top three highlight of my life. I should say professional life was the distribution of that and changing people's lives that way.
Yeah, because I've heard about that, and it is just it does things that you don't even know your body was capable. You're like, what's happening? I can't
I
even
can
keep
say
it in.
like that. Right. I'm this kid from Long Island that started the softball league because the leagues were run awful. I'm that guy. So to end up being able to give away millions of dollars to employees in grand total is just, it was very, very cool, very amazing. And it was just truly beyond my wildest dreams.
That's incredible. So now you go into this difficult arena, this difficult area where you have the money, the company's not there anymore. Well, it's still running, but it's in private equity, and you're just, how do I spend my time? What do I do? And we talked about this a little bit beforehand, but if anyone's listening right now, you can't think about this as just like the entrepreneurship viewpoint, but it's also like the retiree, the person who like takes a step back, who sets up and making a change in their life. Because there's a lot of people who retire and then they don't do anything. So, Frank, how did you deal with this? How did that go for you?
Well, I didn't sell the company to retire. I sold the company for the very reason that I mentioned earlier
Yeah,
was I was no longer needed, right? So my intentions were I'm going to sell the company. I'm going to take chips off the table because my wife and I started thinking, we're in our late 40s at that point. The kids are getting older. All of our eggs were in the I-9 Sports basket. So I was trying to think like somebody who had to be a good steward of our finances and
of
trying to think
course.
term. That was really where my headspace was at. The word retired had never come out of my mouth, but I realized that when I sold the company, everybody was like, "Oh, what are you doing next? Are you retired?" And it made me irate. I was so irritated by people saying retired. I'm like, I'm not retired. Can I take a break? And so I wrote my first book. The name of the book is Running with My Head Down, an entrepreneur story of passion, perseverance, and purpose. And I wrote the book purposely because I wanted to share my story with entrepreneurs in sort of in a story form, because there's so many business books out there. And I did it as a way, because I was so inspired by Michael Gerber's E-Myth. And I love that whole book about Sarah running the bakery. And I was so inspired by Michael Gerber's book that I thought I was going to write it in the same way that people can read my journey through a story of learning business. So I write the book, I publish it in October 2019. I'm going to start doing some speaking, and then COVID happens. And slowly, almost like it's kind of like, the boiling frog
Yeah.
analogy. If you just boil me slowly, I don't realize it. I didn't realize as I get through COVID and I'm not speaking publicly, I'm not writing anymore, that the water is heating up to a boil and I'm getting closer to acknowledging retired. And then by 2022, I'm actually starting to say the word and I'm really unhappy
Yeah.
because now I haven't been doing anything for about 6 years. And I wouldn't say rock bottom. I was more rock bottom in 2017, 2018 when I really just sold the company. But I was in this state of just not doing much of anything fulfilling and
Yeah.
just kind of existing.
Yeah.
Keeping
And I think that's so important because we're in a day and age right now where the world is literally, the cost to do things has gone down significantly. We are literally having this podcast. I just want everyone to preface and understand that this podcast literally costs an hour of my time, an hour of Frank's time, and we're using Zoom, which I pay like $15 a month. Like it's not hard to like have, because I just say this because like back in the day, you used to have to get a videographer, you got to do the whole thing, you got to rent a space, you got to have this, they got to process the film, then they got to have there's so many more variables. Like it's so easy nowadays to speak to people, and I just use that because the podcast for me is one of those fulfilling elements that I like in my life. So it's kind of this, we need to be thinking about what we want fulfilled in our life before it's that time. And that's what one of Frank's biggest messages is. You have to be thinking about these things. Like it's not easy. It's not like, because we get so focused, we get so laser focused on our goals, but we have to have goals outside of that. I
Yeah,
don't know. What do
no,
you?
yeah. What I think is that in whether you're in business school or you are in business, nobody talks about life after exit. They do not say, here's what happens after you sell your company. Most of us as entrepreneurs did not start our company strictly to make the most money possible. We started because we had a passion for something, but nobody tells you what happens next. And what happens next is you go through a grieving process, which I went through. And lo and behold, I will tell you what, to fast forward, I'm going to tell you what broke me out of it. It took 6 years. Baseball saved my life again. I started right as this kid playing baseball, and I created my business because of baseball and because of softball, really. I learned about this over men's 50 softball league that had been around for 90 years in St. Petersburg, Florida.
Oh wow.
And I knew this over 50 league had been around. I always made excuses why I wouldn't go. And then in August of 22, I went to the gym in the morning and I thought, you know what? I'm going to go see what's going on down there. And I drove down to the field, and they play at 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning.
Fantastic.
And on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, they play 3 days a week. They play 60 games a year plus playoffs.
Oh wow. It's
I
a
get
real
down to
league.
the field, I pull into the parking lot, and I see them shagging fly balls. And I kid you not. I'm sorry if these guys, if anybody from the league hears this, but I see the first fly ball go out to left field, and I see the guy drop it. And I'm driving in the parking lot, and I literally blurred out loud in the car, well, I could do that. I definitely could drop a fly ball. Like, damn, like I wasn't intimidated. And
Yeah.
I pulled to the lot, and sure enough, I start talking with the guys, and they were like, do you want to play? And I was like, yeah, sure. And I took the field, and Jordan, I felt alive again. And I started playing in the league 3 days a week, all of
Oh wow.
September, October, November, December. I ended up tearing my quad. Another story. But here's the thing, because I tore my quad and I was playing, I felt alive for the first
Yeah.
time. I wanted to do something that was growing and contributing and fulfilling again. And while I was going through 4 or 5 months of rehab on my quad, I decided, you know what? I'm here to contribute to others. And I think my place in this world is helping franchisors, young entrepreneurs that are trying to franchise their concept or who have franchised it and are struggling. Like I went through an '05 almost bankrupt. And I was like, I can prevent people from the demise of their business. I went through all the pain points you could possibly go through. And I thought, what a waste my life would be if I didn't use my experience to help others. And hence, that's why I've just recently launched this Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. And I have not been this excited about business truly since like 2011, 2012. I kid you not. It's been that long. And I feel young and I feel happy. And I'm never, ever going to ever want to retire ever again.
And it's amazing because I've been thinking about this a little bit, and I hear about these activities where people like light up, and I love that. And I think it's really important because you have to sit there and figure out what lights me up. What are the things I do that light me up? And like, it was funny because my fiance, she went snorkeling. We went on a cruise and we went snorkeling, and I didn't realize that it hit her like that she really liked it, because she can always be like, oh, I really like it. The next time we went snorkeling, she was the first one off the boat, and she usually like is kind of reserved in that stuff. So she's the first off the boat. I go, what happened? She goes, I love snorkeling. Snorkeling's my favorite. And I was like, why? Like, what is so cool about it? Like, obviously, like you see the fish, you understand that. But in reality, we are so distracted with our phones so often that I've realized that when you remove the phone, and I was like, why do I like podcasts so much? Because I'm present. And whenever we get present in whatever we're doing, we get happy. Like there's so many times in our life where we just get distracted and it sucks. And it's like we don't realize it, but that message, that email, that text, that this, that. It's like, yo, you just gotta get present and you'll be happy. Like, why do people like walking to the beach? Because they're present. And
Right.
it's such a big difference. And you see people light up with it. And that's why people love Tony Robbins. No one's sitting there on Instagram at a cut thing. No, you're present.
Hell no. Are you kidding me?
And
First of all, Tony noticed it. He would absolutely say something, he'd call you out. Um,
100%.
yeah. Here's what I would say to folks that are saying, but I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. I want you to think back to maybe when you were a kid and you did something you really love doing that you can do it as an adult in a new way. Or the second thing is, I want you to think about what is it that you do that you lose total track of time? Because Jordan, exactly what you're saying, you're present when you lose track of time, right? There is nothing. It's just you and whatever you're doing. And for me, it was softball. It made me alive again. The smell of the leather mitt, the sound of the ball coming off the bat, the kicking of the dirt by first base, the sights and sounds. It was like sort of like, in Field of Dreams when the dead players come back on the field and how they felt alive. That's how I felt. But maybe somebody else does that through, whether it's snorkeling, whether it's through writing, whether it's through dancing, whether it's through singing or acting, whatever that might be. But that will give you back your life if you let the creative part of your brain reopen up. That's what happened for me. I opened up that side of my brain that was kind of dormant for a long time.
So that is like an incredible distinction because it's not just the presence, but it's the creativity. And when you are creative, because I also like one of my best friends, he was doing commercial real estate in New York. COVID happens. They're like, go home. He's like, ah, man, like, what do you mean go home? He's like, I got to get to work. I got to do something. So he's walking around New York City, sending me videos of Times Square with no one there. I go, that is fascinating. And what he ended up doing was on TikTok, he literally would post 3 videos a day of him because he was supposed to walk around New York, see who was open, see who wanted to do stuff. No one was there. So he literally started blowing up on TikTok. And he's like, Jordan, this helped me through COVID. Like, this helped me through 2021. This helped me through 2022. Because I was already doing the activity, but I never would have. It's very hard to progress because it's easy on social media where you feel the progress because you're like, oh, instead of this, I have another follower. Like it's the little progress points, but it's figuring out what you can progress in. And the progression has to be controllable. So it's like I made it an entire season, or like with the podcast, it's like I've done 130 episodes, I've done 131 episodes, 132. So it's super important that it's a very controllable thing that you can progress with, not just, hey, I got 5 clients. And how do you get the 6th one? Well, you wait for someone to say yes. No, I did 100 outreaches. You got to make sure you're doing the right things. So it's super important. But yeah, no, Frank, I really appreciate that. That was good. That was really good. So yeah, you go.
No, I was going to say that once you feel alive and you feel that creative part of your brain is open, then the possibilities come into play. And back to always being a student of whatever industry you're in. To me, look, I'm 54 years old. I will never stop learning. I went to a business conference back in May, just going to learn about acquisition, how to acquire businesses. I didn't know if I was going to acquire a business, but I wanted to go learn. And it was because I went to that conference that a couple of people had known of my prior company. They had known of I9. And I told them about my inspiration. And they were like, dude, you got to start a podcast. I'm like, me? I've been a guest on a podcast when I was really promoting my book in 2019. I'm like, they were like, "You've got to, are you kidding me? You know so much about franchising and people know your company nationwide. Like, you've got to do it." But the idea of starting a podcast for me was not my idea. It was other people telling me, and that would not have happened had I not gone to this business conference again to be, to go learn some new things. And I got hooked. I mean, I've started recording episodes starting in the end of July, and I record 4 episodes a week. We're already 15 episodes in. I've got 27 guests still lined up. And so we haven't even launched our first episode launches September 4th. So nobody really even knows about us yet. And like you're saying, it becomes like addicting because you're present and you get to hear people's stories and you realize you're impacting people. And I think that ultimately, you know that you're on the right track when you're feeling like you can't wait to do another one, when you can't wait to do this again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so important because there's so many of us that feel lost and don't know what to do. So you have to try out these new activities. And I also want to give you props because I forget what the statistic is, but it's like most podcasts fail after the 8th episode. So since you already did 15 recorded, you just got to put 15 of them out. And then it's like the percentages, the drop off in podcast is significant because people don't realize the consistency that it takes. I mean, you're obviously starting up front, grabbing 40 episodes, which is huge. And then it's like, okay, I do one a week. I got a whole year. Like, I can go on a trip. I can do whatever. But I think that's super important. But your ability to hear an idea, take action on it, really make a difference and make the change, I think it's something the world needs to hear more about. And Frank, you've been incredible. Where can people find out about you? Where can they hear more about you? Where can they learn about you?
Sure. Well, thanks. I mean, they can go to either my website, which is Frank Fumie, FIUME.com, or they can go to our new podcast website, which is EFBpodcast.com. That stands for Emerging Franchise Brands. And we're going to be on all the platforms: Spotify, Apple, Google, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. And hopefully people will check us out starting September 4th.
Let's do it. Awesome. Frank, I really appreciate that. I'll put all that in the show notes. Thank you.
Thanks, Jordan.